Mathias Cormann, the Finance Minister. We were expected to join him a bit later, but Mathias Cormann joins us now. Thanks so much for your time. I want to start with the story, front page of The Australian, if we can. The story by Michael Rodden that suggests that, Graham Samuel, Alan Fels believe that the Big Four are inherently conflicted, basically, because they do the audits, but are also seeking many other contracts with particular firms. What's your view on that?
Well, I mean, that's their opinion. That is not something that we believe is something that is needing to be addressed right now. I mean, we're obviously focusing on dealing with the implementation of the recommendation of the Banking Royal Commission. I mean, accounting firms operate in a highly regulated environment already, and that is, of course, appropriate. And we believe that the regulatory framework that is in place to govern the activities of accounting firms and auditing firms is appropriate.
In terms of the fact that, though, you've got the Big Four doing so much of the auditing work, but then at the same time seeking business, is this something that the parliamentary committee that the Senate committee is going to look into? Is it good that this is at least going to get some light?
Well, there's parliamentary inquiries going on into all sorts of things, and this is one issue that a parliamentary inquiry is assessing, and let's see what comes out of that process.
And in terms of your own experience with these particular firms, the way you've seen them operate, are you comfortable with what you've seen?
Well, I mean, I'm obviously not, running a business that is, currently subject to audit. I'm not, using that particular function. I mean, we procure services as appropriate from consultancy firms, and those services, are provided in the appropriate fashion.
So no concerns, because obviously we recall the experience we went through with the big banks, pillars of our economic system, and we know what happened there. You don't have any such concerns about this particular, the strong language being used by Alan Fels. He says they should be broken up. Graham Samuel says it's inherently conflicted.
Well, we're not planning such drastic intervention. I mean, he's expressing an opinion, and he's entitled to his opinion, and let's see what comes out of this parliamentary process. And I mean, I gather that a Labor senator is pursuing this particular line of inquiry. If the Labor Party wants to come out with a proposal to intervene in the market that way, well, let's hear about it.
Let's talk about some other matters now. The Morrison government to revive plans to drug test dole recipients. Jackie Lambie could be the deciding vote on this. She said she's happy to back it if politicians undertake the same testing. Is that something that the government should be open to?
Well, I'm completely relaxed about that. I think, if that is what it takes to get this very important reform through, I personally would be entirely open to it, and I'd be quite happy to advocate for that within the government. Now, I mean, this is a very important reform because it's all about making sure that we help unemployed Australians on welfare back into work. I mean, to the extent if, obviously unemployed Australians on welfare with a drug addiction problem face an additional barrier in terms of their ability of getting back into work, and it's a matter of making sure that we have an effective way to identify the problem and encourage those Australians to get the appropriate treatment. And I mean, this is a trial for about 5,000 participants to sort of test whether this could work, whether this could help achieve better outcomes. We believe that it can, and we believe that this is something that should be pursued.
What's the belief based on, though? Because the AMA says there's no evidence internationally that this sort of thing works.
Well, this is a trial. Obviously, if there was evidence, we wouldn't be trialling it. We would be just implementing it. This is, we want to ensure that we can get as many Australians from welfare into a job as possible. Now, those Australians on welfare with a drug addiction problem clearly face additional challenges in terms of their work readiness, in terms of their capacity to get back into work. This is not about being punitive. This is about making sure that we identify problems where they exist, that we help and encourage Australians in that situation to address those problems so that they can improve their chance of getting successfully back into work.
In terms of this approach, though, as I said, there's no evidence internationally. You say it's just a trial, but why waste the time? if it has been tried elsewhere and it doesn't work?
No. Well, we want to test whether this can be an effective way of getting Australians from welfare into a job, those Australians who are facing drug addiction problems. I mean, and look, this is also about making sure that those Australians who are identified as having a drug addiction problem, don't use their welfare payments to feed their drug addictions, but use their welfare payments to feed their family. I mean, that's why, if a drug addiction problem is identified through this particular drug testing approach, they would go onto an income management system where 80% of their income would essentially be processed through a cashless debit card, which would not be able to be used for drugs, alcohol, gambling and the like. It's actually also a family welfare initiative.
Mm. If it works, it would be very much a welcome thing, no doubt about it. The social services groups say it's a distraction because the government doesn't want to lift New Start. It's basically to distract from that debate. What do you say to that?
Well, it's not a distraction at all. I mean, firstly, we do increase New Start allowance twice a year. And in the lead up to the last election, there was a bipartisan position not to increase New Start further because, as you might recall, Labor went to the election with $387 billion in higher taxes, and not a single cent of that additional money was directed by Labor in the lead up to the last election towards lifting New Start allowance beyond the twice yearly indexation. So, look, I mean, New Start over the last 25 years on the governments of both persuasions has been indexed on a regular basis by CPI, and that is what we're proposing to continue to do.
The ASX expected to see some gains today off the back of renewed optimism that we've seen internationally of a US-China trade deal. This seems to come and go almost like a cyclical bit of optimism, then it falls over. You wouldn't be putting your house on it, would you, a deal at the moment?
Well, look, I mean, we're encouraged, and we obviously prefer that conversations continue at the highest levels to find a new sustainable accommodation between the US and China in relation to those trade issues. In the end, as I've said on this program on a number of occasions, it's in nobody's interest for trade tensions between the US and China to continue to escalate and to remain at high levels. It's not in the US's interest, it's not in China's interest, it's certainly not in the interest of exporting countries around the world like Australia. So, we are encouraged and hopeful that this will lead to a new sustainable accommodation between the US and China in relation to these matters that both of them have put on the table.
We had a reminder, didn't we, this week in terms of how important trade is to this nation. We saw the current account surplus, but then the GDP only 0.5% for the quarter. If the tax cuts don't kick in as you hope, if people pocket them, what's the plan B?
Well, firstly, in the June quarter, obviously we were facing significant global economic headwinds. Escalating global trade tensions were having a negative effect on global growth. And if you look at what happened in the June quarter in countries like the UK, Germany and Singapore, who all had negative growth, the Australian economy continues to grow. We also had an election in the June quarter where most Australians assumed that there was going to be a change of government to a government that was going to impose significantly higher taxes on the economy. So, we put our budget together in March, April, delivered on the 2nd of April, of course, in the knowledge that we were facing global economic headwinds, in the knowledge that we were facing some downside risks in the domestic economy in the context of droughts and floods. And so, that's why we delivered income tax relief. That's why we have boosted infrastructure investment. And of course, the two cuts in the official cash rate in June and July will also come into effect. Well, will continue to play out in terms of their effect on the economy over the next few months. So, we believe that our plan will continue to strengthen our economy and ensure that we are appropriately resilient in the face of some of the challenges that we're facing internationally.
So you're confident that the tax cuts will flow into the economy as you'd planned?
Well, I mean, more than $14 billion worth of income tax relief has been put back into the bank accounts of Australians over the period since the tax cuts were legislated in early July. So, I mean, clearly that will have an effect, and clearly the 0.5% reduction in the official cash rate will have an effect, as will have our record investment in infrastructure. And we continue to roll out our entire plan to build a stronger economy, including, of course, our deregulation agenda, our free trade agenda, our commitment to bring down the price of electricity, and so on. So, we will continue to build on our plan to develop a stronger economy that is resilient as possible in the face of global economic headwinds.
Labor says that you can't keep blaming others, including the opposition, for the slow growth, that you've been at the helm now for, well, this is your third term. There needs to be accountability in their view.
Well, we're not blaming anyone. We're just explaining the challenges that Australia is facing. And I mean, I would say again, I mean, in the context of what has been happening in other economies around the world, I mean, big, major, strong economies like the UK, Germany, and Singapore, I mean, they recorded a negative quarter of growth. We continue to grow. 0.5% growth in the June quarter 2019 in the context of global economic conditions is actually a comparatively good outcome. And let me tell you, it's much better than it would have been if the Australian people had elected a government increasing the tax burden on the economy. I mean, higher taxes would have made the economy weaker. Higher taxes, as was proposed by Labor, would have made the economy weaker compared to what we are, where we are now.
The Brexit drama continues. Mike Pence, the US Vice President, met with the British Prime Minister. Should we be getting on the front foot to try and, I guess, be the first cab off the rank when it comes to a free trade deal with the UK?
Look, I mean, we are obviously a very, very close friend, partner, ally of the United Kingdom. We stand ready to have the best possible free trade agreement with the United Kingdom in a post-Brexit environment. But of course, in the intervening period, I mean, it's the matter for the government, the Parliament, and ultimately the people of the United Kingdom to determine the way forward in terms of the way they give effect to Brexit. But Australia stands ready to be the good, strong, solid, loyal friend and partner that we have been, and we stand ready to have a high-quality trade agreement with the United Kingdom as soon as they're in a position to pursue that.
And it makes our politics look very calm, doesn't it, by comparisons? Quite odd.
Look, I mean, this is, but I mean, the United Kingdom, it's, obviously a robust economy, a robust democracy. It's a strong and resilient democracy, and they're working through, a challenging, difficult issue through the democratic process. And, it's still got a way to play out by the looks of it. But, I'm very confident that ultimately the democratic processes of the United Kingdom will be able to resolve this.
Finance Minister, appreciate your time. Talk to you soon.
Always good to talk to you.